I'm sure that you guys are aware of what occurred in Gaza, in which over 60 Palestinians, as well as over 2,400 Palestinians, were wounded in protests that happened on the day of the U.S. Embassy being moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And of course, that had the Palestinians very angry, as that would make quite a lot of sense. But we're going to be looking at a really odd and sort of, I want to call it ironic story, because you know, the whole idea of having checks and balances and having a, Supreme Court is supposed to kind of prevent this type of authoritarian tyranny and just crazy shit. But it looks like in this case, the Supreme Court, instead of actually checking that, is instead validating that. So here's what this RT article says. It says, Israel's Supreme Court has upheld the military's use of live ammunition against protesters in Gaza, ruling that lethal force is justified because the protesters are part of a, quote, armed conflict between Israel and Hamas. The court's panel of 3 justices unanimously rejected a petition by Israeli and Palestinian rights groups to prohibit the Israeli army from using snipers and live ammunition to quell protests in Gaza. This is in a 41-page ruling published by the Justice Ministry Thursday night. Chief Justice Esther Hayut sided with the government position that the Gaza protesters were not in fact peaceful civilian demonstrators, but rather part of a, quote, armed conflict between Israel and Hamas, the Islamic political and paramilitary group that currently holds power in Gaza. Israel considers Hamas a terrorist organization. However, the court urged the Israeli army to continue its own internal review of its handling of recent protests on the Gaza border. So you guys saw what happened. I mean, you have these protesters who, vast majority of them were peaceful. You know, some of them were throwing rocks and tires, which can hit the Israelis. There were no casualties on the Israeli side, and there were massive casualties on the Palestinian side, because this is obviously an extremely lopsided conflict, right? This is not a fair conflict in which one side has, high-capacity weapons, has snipers, has the upper hand, has tear gas, etc., etc. This is ridiculous, because this is really bad, and I don't think people will understand how bad this is, because what are you doing in this case when you're doing this? You're going to radicalize more people against Israel. Do you know why? Because if you're not only rendering peaceful protesters useless, but you're literally discrediting them from the foundation, from the jump. And when you are going to take out any sort of validity or possibility of peaceful protesting, what are you going to do? You're going to make violent protests inevitable. That's what you're doing there. Because now what you're going to do is you're going to radicalize them. Because if these Palestinians protest peacefully, and then you go and say, no, they're part of a paramilitary organization known as Hamas, which is a terrorist group, and they're part of an armed conflict, despite the fact that they were protesting while being unarmed. You know what you're doing there? You're going to make them say, well, fuck you then. If my peaceful protest doesn't work and you're going to continue this occupation in the West Bank, I'm going to join Hamas. That is a huge problem if you look at that. Because what the Supreme Court, and again, it's so ironic that the Supreme Court is out there, validating the, crazy authoritarian behavior by Israel. It's pretty fucking, it's pretty ridiculous. It's pretty ironic, right? I mean, just super ironic, because the whole purpose of a Supreme Court is to put those actions in check, but instead it's validating it. But again, this is really dangerous, because not only is it stupid, it doesn't make any sense, it's wrong, but it's dangerous for the Israeli side.